welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. The other day I was listening to an interview with a fellow that might be familiar to you. You may love him, you may hate him. I can kind of anticipate some of the feedback I'm going to get about this. There are a lot of people out there, many all over the world, who have quite a harsh opinion of this man. He is a man, I guess you could say, of many identities and labels, and he's a man who's been banned from speaking at many, many locations, including many countries. The man I'm speaking about is a British author, conspiracy theorist, anti-establishment, enthusiast, and a former footballer and sports broadcaster. The man I'm speaking about is David Icke. Some people love David, others dislike him immensely. And yes, David has been banned from a variety of places because of the things that he says about life, about the government, about reality, and the existence of all things. David Icke is not a man who minces his words. And he has also written a couple of dozen books which are explanations of his viewpoints on a variety of different subjects related to life and reality, and the way that humanity is, in his view, being controlled by forces around it, or around humanity. Some of the things that David is known for are considered radical and maybe even far-fetched. Other things, he says, appear to really make some sense. I wanted to talk about something that I heard him talking about in a recent interview, because I think there's something there, and I think it's like another piece in the puzzle. And I figured that I might just say it my way, which is a different way to David's way, and see how it goes down with all of you who are listening right now. Because sometimes, it's not actually the message that gets people to either believe or disbelieve. It's the way the message is delivered. Okay. However, before I do that, I want to finish something that I started a few weeks ago, because many of you have asked me to do that. And also it's related to the interview that I saw with David Icke that I'm going to be talking to you about as well. And that was the explanation of the Gnostic Gospel of John, also known as the Apocryphon of John. The Gnostic Gospels, just as a bit of a recap, are a collection of spiritual teachings that were recently found in an area of Egypt called Nag Hammadi. There was a building project taking place, and during that build, the construction team just happened to stumble across clay pots or jars filled with previously unknown writings. The writings turned out to be a series of Gospels that had been banned by the church almost 2,000 years ago. Some say they reveal the true teachings of Jesus Christ, and they are nothing like the many words that appear as God's official word in the Bible or the Quran or the Torah. There is a small amount of overlap, but most of the very important teachings of Gnosticism that appear in these Gospels do not appear in any of the Abrahamic writings. So far, I have covered 2 of these Gospels in full, and I'm halfway through covering the 3rd book. I intend to do the entire Gnostic library as time goes on. Why not? Along with everything else. And the 2 books that I've already covered are the books of Mary and the book of Thomas. So the book of Mary and the book of Thomas. I will attach those episodes to the description for today's show if anyone wants to go back and take a look at those episodes. I've really enjoyed looking at the Gnostic Gospels. I have found them to be quite profound in their very simple, gentle messaging. And so I do recommend that if you aren't aware of the Gospel of Mary or Thomas, or even the earlier aspects of the Gospel of the Gnostic Gospel of John that I'm finishing off today, that you go back and watch or listen to those episodes. And I found it really helpful to begin with the Gospel of Mary and then listen to or watch the Gospel of Thomas and then start going through John. You won't need to have done that for today's show. But if you want to do catch up, you are welcome to do so. The order that I did them in was just pure luck, but I found that order to be really helpful in helping me to understand their teachings, and to be able to decipher the interpretations and what's underlying in those interpretations of those Gospels. For anyone who is interested, when it comes to these Gnostic Gospels, I am using the Meyer, that's M-E-Y-E-R, translations in English that I found on gnosis.org. There are all of the Gospels are there, all of the Gnostic Gospels are there, and there are a number of different translations into English, but I happen to prefer the Meyer translation because worldwide it's the most recognized, also has a combination of heartfelt artistry to the interpretation, but also basic sort of groundedness as well. So it's a very comprehensive, and has a really good mix. So you kind of get a sense that the interpretation has taken account of the mood as well as the words. Okay, so that's my reason for choosing that one. So I did also begin explaining the Book of John, and I've done 2 previous episodes on that, starting basically at the top of the Gospel and working my way down. And now this is the final and 3rd episode for the Book of John. And the Book of John in the Gnostic tradition is not the same as the Book of John that appears in the Bible. They are entirely different. The Book of John in the Bible centers around worshipping Jesus and carrying out acts to prove your faith and to prove your dedication to the concepts that are written into the canonized texts of the Bible. But the Gnostic Gospel of John, or the Apocryphon of John, is an entirely different kind of message. It speaks of how the universe was created, how Earth was created, how humanity was created, and the reason why humanity is destined to live within a flawed existence. I'll make sure that my first 2 episodes on the Gnostic Gospel of John are also attached to the description for today's show. So you have lots of catching up to do if you happen to find a rainy day or you're bored and you just want to, I don't know, Gnosticize yourself a little bit. Okay. But you know what? You don't need to do it for today's episode, like I said. I've given you, that early introduction into Gnosticism, and now I'm about to give you the beginnings of the Book of John, just so that you can do some quick catch-up and be ready for the rest of the story. So let me give you a highly abridged version of the Gospel of John that will help you to understand today's show. In a nutshell, there was an entity which has no name and cannot be described that created itself. That is the very first thing. That is the source of creation, referred to by John as simply the One. And from the One emerged the first emanation, and that emanation was Barbelo. Barbelo gave birth to a child, the first child. The first child was the light. And this led to an expansion of other creations, and then more creations, until the 12 constellations, one of which was the goddess Sophia. Sophia bore a child, and the child was called Yaldabaoth. But Yaldabaoth was a distortion. He was created in love by Sophia, but she didn't have the divine approval of the One, or the original source of creation. And so she went out on her own, and as a result of that, her creation was imperfect. Very, very imperfect. And during a moment of confusion, Yaldabaoth, the imperfect creation, disappeared and went off to fulfill his fantasy. His fantasy was to prove that he could be perfect by creating a perfect emanation in his own image. And so he created the very first human. Adam is that very first human. So today, this is where we pick up the story, because it gets a little bit real from this point on. The story hints at exactly the same things that the Bible involuntarily also hints at, and that is that humanity's creator isn't necessarily a divine spirit or a perfect God. Rather, we may have been created by a creature or creatures that are just as imperfect as we are. And so let's continue and complete this story. And then I want to show you it overlaps with what I was listening to David Icke recently saying. So Adam was created by Yaldabaoth, and he was created to be physically capable of work, but intellectually capable of thinking for himself. This resulted in Adam's true self being revealed. He emanated light, demonstrating that he had an element within that came from the perfect emanations before him, including, for example, Sophia, his grandmother. He had the divine spark of his forefathers, something that the very distorted Yaldabaoth, his creator, had missed out on, because Yaldabaoth was a severe distortion, deeply, deeply flawed. And Adam's ability to think made it immediately clear that his intellect was likely to be superior to Yaldabaoth's. This created a deep jealousy and a resentment inside Yaldabaoth. How dare Adam, his own creation, be made of more wisdom, divine wisdom and enlightenment than himself? And so Yaldabaoth consulted with his demons and his angels that he had created, who had helped him to create Adam. And they devised a new body for Adam. They used the four elements. They used fire and earth and water and air to create a representation of the four earthly elements, but they injected him with the ignorance of darkness and a false spirit. And they commanded him to live in a mortal body, subject to things like forgetfulness and mortality and ignorance and estrangement from divine knowledge. And then they put him to work in the garden, which of course is the Garden of Eden. They gave him a companion, Eve, to occupy his time, and left them both ignorant. Now, I will return to Eve in a moment. So, according to the Gnostics, the Garden of Eden was not a true paradise, as it's described in the Bible. It was a false paradise. It was kind of like a prison. And yes, it was filled with pleasure for each of the senses, beauty and trees and fruit and many promises that seemed like they were from a paradise. But they were very deceptive in nature. At the center of the Garden of Eden, Yaldabaoth and his angels and demons had placed the tree of life. The tree of life had been presented as a promise of eternity, but the truth was that it was a perverse and deadly lie. Its true nature was to distract and cater to earthly senses, to offer all kinds of promises that would satisfy immediate desires but ultimately entrap its victims and keep them imprisoned in a cycle of deceptions and material urges. And of course bitterness as well, because no matter what was materially achieved or satisfied in the moment, it would always be replaced by some other desire. So nothing was ever truly achieved. Anyway, Yaldabaoth also brings a deep sleep upon Adam, not a physical sleep, more like a loss of sense and awareness. It was done this way to help entrap Adam into a cycle of sexual desire and destruction, and to make him kind of sluggish so that he doesn't have the ability to see the truth even when it's right in front of him. And even if he does see the truth, he would be unable to understand that it is the truth. So meanwhile, before her creation, Eve is hidden inside Adam in a similar way that's described by the Bible, but a little bit different. And Eve retains that divine wisdom and awareness that was naturally part of her creation, because when Adam was created, he was created to be divine, and she was an aspect of Adam. When Yaldabaoth kind of cast that spell on Adam, he didn't know that Eve would retain her perfection, her divine spark. So in Gnosticism, Eve represents the inherent potential within humanity to find enlightenment regardless of all other things or experiences that might exist. And so when Eve is created from Adam, she emerges with an enlightened afterthought. And so it's referred to as an enlightened afterthought because she came after, but she came enlightened. Yaldabaoth realizes that Eve, as a separate being from Adam, now has emerged with the potential for true awakening, and he pursues her in an attempt to strip away her divine spark. But she can't be apprehended by him because a true divine spark or the true divine wisdom cannot be captured or controlled by the forces of ignorance. And of course, Yaldabaoth had this element of ignorance to him. And once you become aware, you cannot become unaware. And that is the principle of Eve. So Eve has that spark of awareness within her. She just needs to awaken it. And it's important to note that in Gnosticism, Eve is not created from Adam's rib. She's created as an afterthought. And because of this process, whatever was suppressed in Adam was incomplete in Eve. So Adam was suppressed, but the suppression didn't quite work for Eve because she was that afterthought. She therefore emerges with the original divine spark that has been removed from Adam. And before he can stop it, Yaldabaoth has accidentally created the very thing he tried to create but failed to, perfection, or at least the possibility of perfection. With the ability to awaken and then spread, of course, that awakening to Adam, because an awakening can become kind of contagious between people if they are together. And if that were to happen, then the risk might be that the awakening will continue to spread as humanity continues to spread. And Yaldabaoth will lose control of his entire creation. And that's kind of where the snake story of the Bible kicks in. When Adam sees Eve for the very first time, he becomes immediately filled with the enlightened afterthought that was always inside him, because it was in Eve who had come from inside him. In the Gospel of John, it is actually an eagle and a snake that are sent by Sophia rather than just a snake in the garden. Sophia, in the previous episode on John, was desperately looking for Yaldabaoth because he was her creation, and she had lost him because he went off to create humanity. And so she sent the eagle and the snake as kind of messengers, as the desperate mother of Yaldabaoth, who's searching for her son and afraid of what he has created in his distorted manner. She implants the eagle and the snake, both of them, into the Garden of Eden. The eagle is, they're both messengers, but the eagle is the messenger that transmits to her, and it is able to observe and impart the full enlightenment on her behalf. The snake is like a baton carrier who approaches Eve and transmits the message of enlightenment to her. And this is where the story of eating from the tree of knowledge comes in. Sophia recognizes the need to prevent Adam and Eve from living in eternal ignorance without the divine spark apparent to them. It's like a cruelty and a prison, like a prison-like existence that is forever lost in darkness, and so she tries to stop it from continuing. She instructs the eagle and the snake to help them, and they do. The eagle transmits awareness to the snake, and the snake approaches Eve, who is the most prone to awareness, and convinces her to eat from the forbidden tree of knowledge. And this is the forbidden tree of knowledge of good and evil. The moment that they eat, both Adam and Eve realize their nakedness. And in Gnosticism, this represents the awareness of their true nature and the potential for spiritual growth. It's not actually something to be ashamed of. The nakedness is like the truth, rather than some kind of stripping of clothing and being nude out there. And so it's an entirely different type of understanding for nakedness. It's about stripping away everything that could make it difficult for you to see who you truly are, your true nature, and your true spiritual potential. As a result of this, both Adam and Eve are just washed over with pure light that illuminates their minds and reveals divine wisdom. When Yaldabaoth realizes that the humans that he created to serve him in darkness and ignorance had become enlightened and withdrawn from him, he cursed the earth. He found Eve and saw the beauty of enlightenment inside her, and it caused him to fly into a kind of a rage. He forced himself upon Eve and impregnated her with 2 sons. He then threw both Adam and Eve out of their false paradise and cloaked them in thick darkness. So there's then kind of an interesting little twist here, because suddenly the story begins to sound a little bit like the interpretations that I recently was talking about from the Sumerian tablets that led us to the theories of the Anunnaki. Because, everything is connected, isn't it? Everything. It may not sound like it, but it really is. And so let me continue. Eve had become impregnated against her will by Yaldabaoth, and she had 2 sons. Their true names, according to the Apocryphon of John, were Elohim and Yahweh. Now, this sounds a little bit flawed in my viewpoint, because Elohim is a word that can only be used in multiples. And I did do quite a lot of research to see if perhaps it was actually Eloha. But no, it is definitely Elohim. And so I'm not sure why that's appeared in there. And so I'm just giving you full disclosure. So the true names of Eve's 2 sons were Elohim and Yahweh. But in an effort to deceive, Yaldabaoth renamed these 2 sons and called them Cain and Abel. For today's episode, I'm going to, obviously I'm referring to the Maya translation of the Apocryphon of John, in which it stated that Elohim and Yahweh are Cain and Abel. But there is some discrepancy there. So I'm not sure if the translation is sound in this respect. And I want to make sure that I'm sharing that with you. Cain is considered to be the evil son, and Abel is considered to be the good son. Cain represents jealousy and rivalry, and he's given the powers of air and fire. Abel represents innocence and victimhood in the face of injustice, and he's given the powers of water and earth. This is very much the same story as the story of Enlil and Enki of the Anunnaki, where Anu, the father, had multiple children, but 2 of his sons, Enlil and Enki, are featuring characters in the book of Creation of Humanity, according to the Sumerian, interpretations of the Sumerian texts, and are part of the family of Elohim, referred to as the Anunnaki. So in this story, in John's story, the evil son, I guess you could say, was Cain. The good son was Abel. In the Anunnaki story, Cain is represented by Enlil, and Abel is represented by Enki. When Enlil was given power over 2 of the earthly elements by his father Anu, so was Enki. And Enlil was the jealous extraterrestrial who wanted to destroy humanity for exactly the same reason. He wanted to be able to rule over humanity. However, he didn't want humanity to be so smart that they might outsmart the Anunnaki. And that's where there's an overlap here between the Anunnaki story and the story from the Book of John in Gnosticism. On the other side, Enki was the compassionate extraterrestrial towards humanity and wanted us all to survive. So when the Anunnaki created a great flood to kill everyone and everything, Enki secretly defied that plan and saved Noah and his family and ensured that the preservation of the DNA of all living things would also be saved with them so that life could begin again after the flood. And according to the Gnostic Gospel of John, something kind of similar happened. Yaldabaoth drowned Adam and Eve of their knowledge by making them drink the water of forgetfulness. And I found that phrasing to be very, very interesting in the Gospel, which I'll talk about a bit later. So Yaldabaoth drowned Adam and Eve and by making them drink the water of forgetfulness so that they would lose their knowledge in that drowning. But Sophia somehow managed to send down a spirit that helped her to save an aspect of enlightenment from both Adam and Eve that would always live on if they were able to find it within themselves. Adam also had an idea of what was to come, and so before he was drowned of his awakening, he impregnated Eve with their own son. And this son was called Seth, who would continue to repopulate the earth with the divine spark of light and enlightenment, and subsequently would grow that would subsequently grow inside each of us. And it would always be available for us to draw upon if we can simply find it. So Yaldabaoth drowns Adam and Eve by forcing them to drink the water of forgetfulness so that they will lose their knowledge. And it's very interesting because there is evidence out there, the pyramids are always the perfect example to go by. The Sphinx and the pyramids, the Great Pyramid in particular. I do like to divert back to that because it's a marvel of engineering. And as much as the scientific disciplines would like us to believe that it is around about 5,000 years old, thereabouts, it needs to be much older in order to reconcile it with the water markings that it has that are matched against known flooding events in the area. And so it just doesn't make sense that it's only 5,000 years old. It is at least 10,000 years old, potentially 20,000 years old, maybe even 26, 7,000 years old, something like that. It could be even more. And there have been archaeologists and geologists who've gone out there who have said that they do believe that it is at least 12,000 years old. The advanced engineering that must have been part of the knowledge framework of the people or entities that built the Great Pyramid just on its own, or Göbekli Tepe being another one, or a variety of other different monuments around the world, demonstrates that there was a knowledge there that we don't know anymore. And so it kind of means that the Gospel of John in the Gnostic tradition is another example of the potential of there being a great flood that wiped out the memory and the knowledge and the enlightenment of the people who were here before us. Just something to kind of, another jigsaw puzzle piece. So let me just continue on to the story here. There's a promise within the Gospel of John, as I'd mentioned, that Sophia is going to return, or something like that, and she's referring in the Gospel to preparing a kind of a holy place on earth in which all of the knowledge of the divine would one day be revealed when the time is right. So Do you see actually, if I just stop for a moment, what's actually happening here in this gospel? We've just found a very interesting connection with the description of Sophia's return, between the Bible story, the Anunnaki story, the Gnostic texts, and also, very recent contemporary things like Chris Bledsoe's Lady in White. Also, discussions about Atlantis and the predictions by Edgar Cayce and more. All of these different things that I've just mentioned all appear on the surface of it to be unrelated, except they suddenly seem a little bit related. And I told you from day one of this show that when I actually talked about Atlantis and Chris and Edgar Cayce's predictions and then Chris Bledsoe, that everything is connected. Everything is connected. Every single little thing. Everything. Everything is a piece in the puzzle. And we each have a piece of that puzzle. And it's a very good reason, all by itself, for us not to hate anyone, regardless of who they are, and regardless of how much an a-hole they might be. And that's the reason why also we should raise our children right, and teach them to be kind to animals and to only kill another living being, whether it be animal or human or plant life or whatever, if doing so serves a purpose, and that purpose being our survival and things like that. Not for sport, but for food and for shelter and things like that, because everything is connected. And we all need each other to survive and to awaken. And I think that the Gospel of John boils down to that. It tells a story, but it tells a story of how everything is connected. And the fact that we have forgotten that means that we go off on our own tangents and then decide that this is worth more than that and this is the truth and that isn't and things like that. But I believe that when we awaken, what we're awakening to is that we all need each other in order to survive, and that each of us is in ourselves a piece of the puzzle. And so in order for us to awaken, we need to acknowledge that each of us has a piece of the prospect of that awakening. So just, to kind of, for those who are new to the show and haven't started from the beginning, in episode 1 of this show, I talked about how the lost civilization of Atlantis was described to be a utopian place where humanity's ancestors enjoyed a closeness to the gods, a place far more advanced than we are today, and it was destroyed. Edgar Cayce also appeared in episode 1, not personally, but I talked about him. And Edgar Cayce predicted that the truth about humanity's origins were buried in Atlantis and other places around the world, so that we could find them when the time is right. Now, Edgar Cayce had already died when the Gnostic Gospels were found, in case you were wondering. But somehow the Gospel of John explains that Sophia, the divine mother of all creation, of all living things, has hidden the truth so that it can reveal itself to us one day. And the Anunnaki story tells of how two brothers, perhaps they were called Enlil and Enki, or maybe they were called Elohim and Yahweh, or perhaps they were called Cain and Abel. Well, they disagreed about what should be the future of humanity. But before he died, the Son who stood for good prepared us so that we could live on one day and learn the truth. And meanwhile, over the course of centuries, and this is the most uncanny thing, over the course of centuries, an impossibly beautiful, sad and loving lady has been pleading with us to find the light within us. And I'm getting a little chill just by saying that. And she's saying that to us, whether it be through Our Lady of Fatima sighting that took place, or the other Marian sightings that took place around the world for hundreds of years, or even Chris Bledsoe's Lady in White. She's pleading, and she's beautiful, and she's sad, and she's the epitome of compassion and love. And she wants us to find the light inside us, the light that's described in Gnosticism, but was banned by the church, that very same church that the book of Thomas says is deceiving us. And when we find that light inside us, that allows us to return to as we were always meant to be, divine emanations of a single source of all creation. Oh my goodness, I love my job. I love my job, I do. And I don't think I'll ever become a religious person exactly. And despite the fact that, I also believe that the Bible and probably the Quran and the Torah, well, I consider that they're probably all about 80% gibberish. But I do believe that there is about a 20% something in those books that is the true story of our life. And it's another piece in the puzzle. So, okay, all right. So here's me gushing about how I love my job. And that's because, I'm just going to keep looking. This is just, I love this. I wake up every day and I love it. I go out and I see, what can I find out now? So the rest of the Gnostic Gospel of John speaks about human destiny. And this is where it's referred to as the destiny of souls. And this is where John recounts the continuation of the divine message that he was given by Jesus. When he was hidden away by himself, which is what I cover in the first episode in which I talk about the book of John, he's hidden away and he's contemplating life and everything he has been told. I cover some of these messages and how John has been dealing with conflict in that earlier in the first part of the series, relating to whether or not Jesus is genuine or not, because he's been given advice that Jesus might be lying to him. So if you want to understand those messages and the conflict that John had, just go and listen to part 1 of the book of John, and it's all in there. And of course, you can just click the episode link that appears in the description for today. But anyway, so Jesus says to John that those of us who are empowered by the Spirit of life will focus ourselves on remaining what is called an unshakable race. And the words unshakable race are actually used in the gospel specifically. Jesus says that it will be a very difficult job to do, and it may even be impossible for some people. But those who manage to remain incorruptible and who live without anger, without jealousy or envy, without desire or greed will be transformed by spirit into a force for perfection that allows them to maintain strength and protection against evil actions. And that this will serve these individuals after death. The souls with divine power, the ones that achieve this, will also achieve eternal rest through the intervention of the incorruptible one. And the incorruptible one is, I believe, the source of all creation, which the Gospel of John simply describes to be the One. The One is the one who created itself and then created Barbello, and then the trickle-down effect where it ended up creating everything else. Souls who remain ignorant are destined to continue in the earthly realm after death. And this is the concept of reincarnation. They will continue to reappear and reincarnate and learn to remember their divinity kind of the hard way, in whichever way will eventually help them to remember. And they are bound and imprisoned on earth until they finally wake up. So it is through a reiteration of a physical existence again and again and again that the souls who remain ignorant must learn the hard way. And once they eventually wake up, they too will be given eternal peace. But who knows how many lives that might take. So the gospel ends with a lengthy hymn about the manner in which the Saviour, will help humanity. And weirdly, this Savior does not sound like Jesus in the gospel. It sounds more like Sophia. It sounds as though in this aspect, Jesus is the messenger, but the Savior does appear to be Sophia in this hymn. And although it doesn't state specifically, it does sound more like Sophia than it does Jesus. So the hymn talks about the manner in which the Saviour has found a way to save humanity from its ignorance by planting seeds of enlightenment for humanity to find, which I think is kind of nice, like a little game, like an Easter egg hunt. There are roadmaps everywhere, and they all lead to the path of enlightenment if they're followed. I find that really exciting. And the thing is, now as soon as I started scratching the surface of all of these questions that I have about, you see, no one should have ever let me read the Bible because that's what did it. All the questions that I had, I feel as though I can see little seeds everywhere, and there are many of them. It's about finding them and heading down the path long enough to find the light and the enlightenment. And so this is really reassuring for me. And the hymn is quite lengthy, so I'm not going to read the entire hymn out because I'm not sure that all of it is necessary, and I've kind of just given you a little nutshell description of it. But mostly the hymn talks about everything that the Saviour has endured in order to make it possible for humanity to survive and thrive. And Gnosticism is very much a feminist type of tradition and belief system. And I do believe that it is hinting at the plight of the feminine spirit and linking it to Sophia. I want to read to you the instructions for humanity that form a smaller part of the hymn. And this is what it says. I'm reading verbatim from the Mayer translation. Okay, so it says, I am the forethought of pure light. I am the thought of the Virgin Spirit who raises you to a place of honour. Arise, remember that you have heard and trace your root, which is I, the compassionate. Guard yourself against the angels of misery, the demons of chaos and all who entrap you, and beware of deep sleep and the trap in the bowels of the underworld. So basically, this is the path towards finding the light inside us. And that light is what sparks our divine protection and allows us to emerge from our prison existence into the next phase of our existence. If we stop ourselves from getting sucked into chaos, does that sound familiar? And all of the misery that chaos brings. The chaos might continue to exist around us, but we don't have to choose it to accept it as part of us. We rise above it. The same when it comes to the other dark forces that tempt us. And those dark forces are covered in quite a bit of detail in my episode on the Gospel of Mary, which is also attached as a link in today's show. And that's the reason why I think it's great or easiest to start with Mary and listen to that episode and then listen to the one on Thomas and then do 1, 2, 3 parts of John. I just first got my way into researching these in exactly the right order, I think, in order to be able to learn them and really digest them. And so basically that's it. It did take 3 episodes, but now we know what is inside the Gnostic Gospel of John, also referred to as the Apocryphon of John. You can read the Apocryphon of John and all of the Gnostic texts if you visit the website gnosis.org. I've been relying on the English translations conducted by Mayer, as I said, for all of my research on Gnosticism. And weirdly enough, yes, the language can sometimes be hard to understand because it's a lot of words, isn't it? Especially if you read the Gospels in the wrong order. But I got lucky and I started with Mary, and I think that that was the right thing to do, and I'm really glad that I did. And I chose her because she's a girl, to be honest. Mary was all about, the book of Mary was all about the existence of the light inside us. The book of Thomas was about how the church is a distraction, a deliberate distraction designed to keep us away from our enlightenment. That's a shocker. And John is a book of how we were created and why we are in the situation that we find ourselves in now. And it provides, as I said, a puzzle piece as to how to transform into an enlightened being so that we can escape our earthly prison. I have to say, though, that I don't consider Earth to be a prison. I'm a very happy person and I consider my life to be a privilege and a joy, especially because I have pets. And pets, dogs and cats and birds and fish and things, they make our life wonderful. And maybe the odd iguana or whatever else that people like to collect. But, life is what it is. I think that life is a privilege and a joy. But, it really does make me wonder. And I do see and acknowledge that the world isn't like this for everyone. The world is filled with a lot of misery and trauma and pain for many living beings everywhere. And that's not just humans. It can be the case for anything that possesses life, possesses a certain, they sit somewhere on the gradient of misery. And if there is a path upward and forward out of this, then I'm all for it, even if it is on behalf of others. So as promised, let me shift gears to return to David Icke on a high note. I'm going to read a word-for-word description about David Icke that was provided to me by artificial intelligence when I asked it to give me a 2 to 3 paragraph long summary about him. So check this out. This is definitely a viewpoint written by someone. David Icke is a British conspiracy theorist, author and former footballer and sports broadcaster. He is best known for his controversial views, including the belief that the world is controlled by a secret group of shape-shifting reptilian beings, which he refers to as the lizard elite. Icke's theories often incorporate elements of anti-Semitism, as he claims that many of these reptilian beings are part of a global Jewish conspiracy. He has also promoted various other conspiracy theories, such as the idea that the COVID-19 pandemic was a hoax, orchestrated by powerful elites, and that 5G technology is harmful and part of a larger plan to control humanity. Icke's viewpoints have led to significant controversy and backlash. He has been banned from several social media platforms, including Twitter, for spreading misinformation and hate speech. Additionally, he has faced bans from entering multiple countries. In 2019, the Australian government cancelled his visa on character grounds, preventing him from embarking on a speaking tour. More recently, in 2022, the Dutch government banned him from entering the Netherlands, what a reputation, and the entire Schengen area of 26 European countries for 2 years, citing concerns that his presence could disturb public order. Despite the controversies and bans, Icke continues to have a following and remains a prominent figure in the world of conspiracy theories. His books and public appearances attract attention from those who share his views or are curious about his ideas. However, his theories are widely criticized and debunked by experts and authorities who warn of the potential harm caused by spreading such misinformation. And that was me. I just asked for 2 or 3 paragraphs, and that's what I got from artificial intelligence. So someone out there who's in control of AI really doesn't like David Icke. Okay, so full disclosure. I am fully vaccinated and I intend to remain fully vaccinated. I have no issue with 5G. I think Jewish people are just as nice as black people, or just as nice as Asian people, or just, we have good and bad examples everywhere around the world. And I'm not sure that I believe in lizard people either. But I haven't researched lizard people. And so you never know. One day I might come back with yet another piece of the puzzle. Who knows? So obviously my thinking is not exactly in direct alignment with David Icke's thinking. But what I heard him say in an interview the other day reminded me of the Gnostic Gospels. So here's a rundown of what he said so that you can hear it as I've interpreted it, rather than the gruff, kind of aggressive and generally pissed off way that David delivers most of his viewpoints, because he does. The interview that I'm drawing from here is published on David Icke's channel on YouTube, which is, I think, just called David Icke. And the title of the video is called Escaping the Matrix, Awakening and Enlightenment Simplified. Yeah. So what I've done is I've taken notes of the points in David's discussion with his interviewer, and then I've rearranged those points into something that I think make them flow easier so that we can understand them better. And of course, I've taken out all of the usual David Icke isms, the rhetoric and aggressions and stuff like that. And this is what's left over. So the conversation begins by challenging the common assumption that enlightenment comes solely from accumulating information, such as meditating for hours, studying ancient texts, or gathering wisdom through books. Instead, David emphasizes that genuine awakening involves an internal, lived realization of who you truly are. They use personal examples, and the fellow who interviews David talks about how he's letting go of his record collection, even though he loves his record collection, because it's a way of letting go of some of the material. So basically the material that anchors you to the physical realm, he wants to be able to let go of that. And David talks about how transcendence requires a release of these attachments so that an internal awareness can begin to shine through. And then in this discussion, they start making a crucial distinction that rather than identifying the body or the soul, which is conceptualized as an energetic body or even a separate entity in the afterlife, the true nature of self is actually a pure awareness of an infinite formless state connected to all of existence. Now that infinite formless state is referred to in the Gospel of John as the One. And so letting go of that and recognizing the true nature of self as a pure awareness of the One, and internalizing this rather than merely understanding it. So it goes beyond intellectualism or some kind of knowledge and understanding. It has to be something that is felt. Now, this is something that appears in the Book of Mary, in the Book of Thomas, and kind of it's skirted around in the Book of John as well. And it also appears in the mystical faith of Kabbalah in the Zohar, in the Book of Zohar. So this is not particularly radical unless you're maybe thinking in terms of Bible. It just that people don't often hear it being said this way because it has the David Ickeisms in it. So rather than understanding something intellectually or remembering it or anything like that, if you internalize it and make it part of yourself, you can prepare to transcend not only the earthly limitations that exist, but also those cycles of reincarnation. And David refers to them in that discussion as the wheel of samsara, as being those cycles of reincarnation. Can you see where I'm going with this? And David actually mentions his affinity to the principles of Gnosticism as well, which is a very gentle thing. It's so it's funny how just delivery can make a difference. The idea is that if you truly embody this state of awareness, you won't be drawn back into the endless cycle of reincarnation or trapped by the astral constructs upon leaving the body. Then during the interview, the dialogue shifts to contemporary types of issues, particularly the integration of artificial intelligence with human cognition. And David is very skeptical when it comes to artificial intelligence and technology in general. Rather than seeing technology as a tool for liberation, David warns that a deliberate strategy is in play which is designed to merge the human mind with artificial intelligence. And the aim here is for the computer algorithm to control our thoughts and our feelings. And when he said that, that got my attention. You know, I listen to all kinds of things and sometimes I end up switching off and sometimes I listen all the way through. And it all depends on whether the person speaking has something to say that I think is worthy listening to, whether I like them or not. And so this did, it got my attention. Because when have you ever heard of a tech giant giving away technology resources for free? And that's the very first thing I thought. And, you know, and yes, I have 24/7 free access to artificial intelligence that it sucks up to me all day long. It helps me to create these episodes much faster than I would have, than I would need so much more time if I had to scour through a lot of different books and everything to get the information that I need. It helps me to search for information and it's all free. I do have to double check because artificial intelligence gets things wrong. The other day it told me that Ron DeSantis was the vice president. And then when I pointed out that it was wrong, it said, oh, sorry, Mike Pence is the vice president. And I said, no, I'm sorry, you're still wrong. And then it finally came back with JD Vance as the vice president. But it had to take some time to find that information. That says an awful lot about lots of things. But anyway, all right. So it's not entirely accurate, but it's free and it really speeds up the process. And there's also no advertising. Have you noticed when you use AI, there's no advertising, there's no sales pitches, nothing. It's 100% free. You can buy coins and get advanced things and all kinds of stuff, but you can still use it and really quite well for free. So what is it that all these tech giants who are giving me free access to unlimited AI resources, what is it that they want in return? Because they didn't become billionaires by being charitable. Do they want my brain? Is that what they want? So that they can enslave me in the darkness? I'm just curious. And I know it sounds like I've really fallen down a rabbit hole, doesn't it? So David is talking here about how it's not about making life easier for anyone. It's about manipulating the mind, and that's why it's free. And David explains that the whole Elon Musk thing about waving around a chainsaw and gleefully proclaiming how he's going to break down the government and and become this efficiency expert, who's going to, get rid of surplus and make America run better and things like that. And if anyone's aware of that, that's what he did. He got a chainsaw out at a recent conservative function, and made it look as though, this was his prop for chopping up the government. It caused a lot of controversy and it looked a little bit insane, to be honest. But David said in this interview that it was deliberately deceiving. What David says that Elon really wants, and this is part of a bigger agenda with all of the tech leaders who are kind of complicit in this. Well, according to David anyway, they want to reset the world. First, they want to destroy the ability for everything to function at all. And then they want to make it necessary to insert technology as the fix-all solution to the problems that they created. And by doing this, they are recalibrating the world and our entire perception of reality and society in a way that people will not even question after a time, because people will just be desperate and grateful for it to be fixed, and they will invite the technology into their lives. It's the creation of a new world order run by technology. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this today, because it kind of sounds like, yeah, but David Icke, and you've totally ruined the whole Gospel of John now by putting David Icke into the middle of it. If you've been watching the Ellie Dreams Down Under channel, my channel that I'm always talking about, then you would already know something that I'm about to tell you. Because the cards told us this. The beast that's referred to in the book of Revelation is technology. That is the beast. But don't worry about it too much, she says. Don't worry about it too much. It's all right. Because if the beast is technology and Donald is the Antichrist and Elon is the false prophet or something like that, then all it means is that a temple is going to be built, someone's going to go sit in a chair and proclaim to be God, and then the whole plan is going to fall apart and everything comes good. David's interview discussion aligns very closely with the Gnostic ideas. And he even mentions Gnosticism as he's describing his viewpoints in this interview. The Gnostics talk about something that we now call archontic control, which is the concept of something non-human being used to control the human spirit, to keep us in darkness or in ignorance. And today I hope that I've been able to show you how powerful the message of the Apocryphon of John is, and how it's saying very much the same thing that David Icke is saying. The problem with David is that he just keeps pissing everybody off. And so they just ban him from everywhere. But you know what? The Apocryphon of John was also banned. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. That makes me really curious about some of these people who are banned. There might be 50% of them, there might be a 50% element of them that is just bonkers or self-serving or opportunistic or cruel or nasty or whatever. And I'm not saying he is or he isn't. But it's sometimes good to listen, because the other 50% or even 5%, whatever, might be saying something and it's being hidden because of how it's being received or treated or spoken. It's just, he is radical, but so are a lot of people. It doesn't mean that they don't have a piece of the puzzle. So yes, David Icke, if you are watching or listening, you are invited onto this show, but you have to behave yourself so that I don't end up getting banned from anywhere, okay? Because I like my freedom. The key is to say everything you need to say, but just to say it in a different kind of a way. But what I'm interested in when it comes to someone like David Icke is that he also started talking about how people can resist falling into the traps that are presented by the status quo. And that's exactly what is suggested by the hymn of the Saviour that appears in the Apocryphon of John. And every little bit of understanding helps, doesn't it? So there you have it. Who would have thought that I'd somehow find a marriage between David Icke and the gentle messages of love that appear in the Gnostic wisdoms? But I did. Good for me. This is Ellie, and you can find me at Ellie Dreams Down Under on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who is watching or listening today on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. If you'd like to become a member of the KGRA viewership family, just go to live.kgradibby.com and enter promo code Ellie, that's me, to get 30%